Hey everyone, it's Don over at Cobblers Plus, and today we're going to be talking about belts, storing them, and what kind of belts we recommend to look for, and belts that we recommend staying away from. So come join us and check it out. So again, thank you for joining us, and like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about belts today, how to store them, and we're going to talk about different types of belts, ones that we recommend staying away from unless your expectation is just to be able to wear them on occasion, in other words. So first things first, we're going to have to talk about the different types of belts there are before we can really talk about storage, to give you a better perspective and understanding of why we would recommend that. Now, one of the most common belts that we see out there that everyone sees readily available everywhere, and I try avoiding them like crazy as well, and I highly recommend you stay away from them if you plan to have that belt for an extended period of time, is just a multi-ply belt, which is kind of like this one right here. I can't remember if this one was a branded one or not. Now, it just says genuine leather, but it has a nice cool print on it and everything. But the problem is there is no stitching on there, you can tell. So with the multi-ply belts, majority of the time they have somewhat of a kind of rounded look to it. So they have like a filler in there. So they've got one piece of material, whether it's synthetic or leather, and then another piece of material, and then there's something in between to either give a certain shape or some kind of nice appearance and thickness as well. And this is multi-ply. This belt has at least 3 layers put together to create this belt. However, it's only glued. So the dilemma is with a glued belt, as most of you can assume, you end up with problems like this right here. This belt has come apart quite some time ago, where you can see the bottom layer. This is that liner. Here's that filler inside that kind of gives it that nice shape, and then you've got the top layer. And this happens very frequently to belts like this, because eventually that adhesive gives out. Eventually, it starts to stretch. One material stretch quicker than the other, especially if they're using different types. If the upper has got a print like this one here, and it's a little bit denser, it's not going to stretch as quickly as this softer leather right here that's on the backing. This one here is a Brighton collection belt. I think this might have been actually my mom's belt, and she loved it, so we're gonna have to try to figure something out for her so that we can salvage it without actually turning it back to a cruddy multi-ply adhered belt. So that's one of those things that we can't stand. Now the other types also, there are some that are a little better, in other words, but at the same time they aren't all that great either. It's like this Christian Louboutin belt that we have. It's definitely a better step up from these ones because they do have a filler to give it a nice shape that's a little rounded. But this Louboutin belt, we actually just before this recording, I just did a recording on shortening this belt here. This one, you can see the multiple layers in there. There are a total of 3, but they're all the same thickness. So this belt will hold up better, but it's still going to come apart a little quicker. It's got a nice finish on the edges here, which kind of seals it up. Some of these other belts also have a nice edge as well, but you got to keep in mind this is just glued. So when it comes time that it starts coming apart, there's a lot more limitations of fixing that as well. Now, there are also other belts that are kind of more of a step up, in other words, depending on what you're looking for. Obviously, there are belts like this elastic one right here that's all stretchy. It's got a weaving pattern, so there's no issues there. I mean, maybe if one of those pieces of elastic gives out, or if it's made out of a cotton or nylon material that's weaving like that, one of the pieces may end up wearing out, maybe rubbing against the belt loop or a buckle or who knows what. Same thing with like this leather here, this leather one here. This is an LL Bean one right there. You can see right there, it's got that weaving pattern there. It's much softer because of that and everything, and there are strands of not harder but more durable, like either a cotton rope or nylon material inside. Most of the time it's cotton because cotton's more flexible, so there's a lot of good durability in this belt here, for example. But once one of these strands start to go and is worn out, it's a little hard. You have to get in there and do minor fix here, minor fix there. There's no way of undoing one entire strand and then redoing that strand. It's just not cost effective whatsoever, because we're looking at a few hours worth of work to fix that. But they are definitely a step up from just those multi-ply belts where they're just glued together and sandwiched like that. They hold up a lot better. They will eventually start to wear down, however, so that's kind of a step up regardless. And then you got other things where they have like that right there, where it's combination of basically both. It's like plied leather, and then it's got a weaving pattern in the middle. That doesn't mean that it's kind of more in between the two. You have to consider this belt right here along the lines of one of these belts here that's just multi-ply leather, and take that into consideration, that just because it's got a strand like this being weaving through doesn't mean it's more durable. It's actually in that same exact boat and category as these two right here, basically. So just wanted to mention that for any of you that might be thinking, well, what if I go in between? I see this cool belt and it's right in between the two. Still put in that same category of just glued only. Those strands that are stitched down the middle aren't going to do much to help save the edges right here for you. So thought I'd mention that for any of you out there thinking that's the case when it really isn't. So one of the belts though, however, that I do recommend is always stitched. Ones that are actually stitched are along the seams right on the very edges, like this Johnston Murphy belt that we have here. Obviously it's got some cracking, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but you can see that there's a row of stitching there. I've got my personal Allen Edmonds belt here. I was hoping to find a belt that matches my Park Avenues that are a lighter color, and the belt that matches that particular shoe was actually a multi-ply adhered belt, and I flat out refused to get it. I got the belt that doesn't match it, which is this one here. The color at least matched it fairly close, but the design didn't match the shoes, and I'd much rather have the design not match it completely, but make sure that it's stitched. And this one, actually, they have 2 rows of stitching, which is pretty nice. So you got 2 rows on this end and 2 rows on this end, and makes it that much more durable, in other words. So kind of cool. But in their case, they're just thinking of aesthetics. It looks cooler with 2 rows of stitching. I've got another belt here, same idea. This one doesn't say what it is exactly brand wise, but same story. It's stitched down the edges here as well, so that's a huge step up from those. Now there's one more category of belt that's at the highest level considered to be, and that's usually single ply, just one piece of leather, and that would be like this belt blank that I have here. This is a belt blank that's dyed and it's ready to be converted into a belt. It's only one piece of leather. It's got the rawhide on the back and everything. It can either be finished out or you can put a cover on it. But there are a number of Western belts, especially out there, that are like this, where they just have one single layer of leather. Now, obviously, there are other things that you can do with this piece of single hide leather, like this snakeskin belt that I did. This was a single ply belt, and then I put snakeskin over top of it, and it was stitched all around the edges to prevent the stitching from coming undone. This was a belt that I've done years ago. It was supposed to be this really bulky, heavy belt, so it's got no trimming or anything. It's just really rough and everything. That's just one of those things I want to kind of point out, that you have options for this. I also did the same thing with the belt a little while ago. Some of you may have seen pictures that I've posted on some of our on Facebook and Instagram of a eelskin belt, where we took one of these raw hides and we actually wrapped the leather around it, and so it looks like the entire belt is made out of a single piece of eelskin. Well, eelskin is much too thin to make a belt out of, so you have to start out the base, and that's this rawhide strip right here that's just single ply. Very durable. It's going to hold up for a very long time. The eelskin, however, obviously is an exotic skin, so you have to take that into consideration, that after a period of time it may rub up against a certain belt loop or something else, or the belt buckle, and may become weaker, but the overall structure of the belt will not deteriorate for quite some time. It will hold up for a good period of time. Now that we've gone through basically the structure of the belt, materials. Now materials, they come in of a huge variety. Like I said, there's single ply cowhide here. There are synthetic man-made materials like this one. It's got a printed leather here, but there are other ones that have, where is it? Which one was it? This one. This one right here, it's got a leather upper on it. However, the backside is man-made, and you can see right here how the backside just giving out on this belt, right where the holes are, especially all that fraying. It looks nasty there, but there are a lot of synthetic man-made materials out there, which is very common. The belts that have multi-ply layers like this one that came apart, usually that interior piece majority of the time is some form of synthetic material, at least majority of the time. But sometimes, however, you can have a leather, but it might be a lower grade leather, kind of like genuine leather or corrected grain. Most of the time it's the genuine stuff. That's one whole different category about leathers that we'd have to get into in a different video, but genuine is considered to be the lowest. So if you see it says genuine leather, doesn't mean it's a high quality leather, it's just a general terminology. So for us cobblers and leather workers and everything, when we see or hear genuine, most of the time, about 9 out of 10 times, our thought is, okay, that's just low grade leather, in other words, or printed leather, kind of like this one here where it's all just printed. But typically those are the types of materials you'll find. Obviously you'll find some that are going to be, elastic like this one here. You're going to find some that are, nylon material and stuff. Those are more of like a tactical type of belt, which I don't have one here today. But that gives you a general perspective. There's a huge variety of them. If you're wanting to have a good high quality belt that you can use in a more dressy type situation, full leather is the way to go. Like this Allen Edmonds belt again of mine, this one's a full grain leather belt here. Or if you have a custom belt, you know exactly what it is. Raw cowhides like this too, you can make belts out of as well. So it really comes down to what your decision is and what you want to do. One of the ones that we see commonly though on a number of belts like this Johnston Murphy we have, this one I believe says genuine leather somewhere. I'm not even seeing it. Doesn't even say it on here, but yeah, it doesn't even say genuine leather on here, surprisingly. But it is a leather, however. The only thing is that the top part of this belt, oops, I'm knocking over boxes here. The top part of this belt, you can see how wrinkly it is right there, especially if you turn it like that, and scuffed up. Usually that is a genuine leather, which is a lower grade. It has a tendency to have a heavy, thick coat of some kind of acrylic paint or dye over top, and eventually it's going to start to crinkle. It may peel as well. I've seen belts like this start to peel up slowly, where you can see that crinkle, and this is just holding it straight. There's a little bit of a crinkling, and if you turn it inward, there's even more. So just keep that in mind. That's what kind of sets the prices apart for belts a lot of times. If it's a branded name where you're not usually paying for a brand like this one here, for example, I mean, typically your belts can be a good couple of $100s, but they're full grain leather that's going to hold up very well. Or if you're finding a belt like this one, which original price was $69.50, which is $70 from Johnston Murphy, that's one of the dilemmas. Is it's a kind of a cheap belt. I mean, $70 is $70 still, but if you're comparing it to, say, high quality custom belts versus even middle grade belts that are actual full grain leather, or single ply leathers like this is an extremely cheap belt. And obviously I don't even have to state the fact that if you go down to like $20, $30, or $40, those are not even leather potentially, most likely. And if it is leather, it's even worse than what this is here. So keep that in mind when you're purchasing a belt. You could be looking at anywhere between $100 to $300. That's kind of a sweet spot if you want a good collection of belts. Now, however, like belts like this here, again, it's hard to tell. They're much more than that. They're above that $300 mark, that's for sure. But at that point, you are paying for the brand name. So just keep that in mind. Maybe talk to a salesperson. If they're knowledgeable, they'll tell you what the case is. And I know not every single salesperson is there to know what everything is. They'll just give you the general idea and they'll say, well, it is genuine leather. Well, it's kind of going to come to your full discretion to look over the belt. First thing I always say to take a look at is if you bend it inward like that and there's a little bit of crinkling. This one has extensive crinkling, but if you see just a little bit of crinkling, usually that's a genuine leather, and that's a thick coat that's going to either peel up or look horrible and look damaged on that as well. So just wanted to point that out to you. Now, one last thing I'll mention before we get into the storage of your belts and things like that, where we'll talk about is the different methods that they secure the belt buckles. Now, this belt right here we have is one of those reversible belts that you can twist and change the color, which is kind of nasty considering this is the one that has all that right there. Again, one side is leather, the other side is synthetic. Why would you do that for one of those reversible belts? But a reversible belt, it typically has these little screws right here that hold it in place. Sometimes they have a little bit of a latching mechanism too, but most of the time it's these screws. Eventually those things will pop off, the screws wear out, or the man-made or leather material will give out because there's not much surface area for those screws or the latch to hold it in place. There's this belt that Janelle actually did a dye job on, kind of cool, doing some acrylic paint work on there. It was definitely an awesome project. But this belt buckle, I should probably take it apart real quick, has a latching belt. Now this latching belt has broken since, and we just needed to have a good belt. You can see right here it's got these little teeth right there. Those teeth are designed to dig in there, and then usually you have this pin that will lock into place, and it'll hold it nicely. But eventually even those give out. One of my belts that I love to wear all the time, it's given out on me, and I'm gonna have to either fix it, replace it, or something. But I haven't made a full decision on what I want to do with that one. But those are some of those belts that you'll see where they're reversible, and they're secured in kind of a easy method. It can be fixed once it kind of gets damaged, as long as the buckle itself is intact. Unlike this one, the latch is snapped completely. We can fix up the belt. We may have to shorten it just enough to basically get new material inside the belt buckle to hold everything, but that can be taken care of. The other methods that we see a lot of times are riveted on, like this here. This one's got a rivet going clear through. You can't take these apart, open them up. They are rivets. They are not designed to come apart very easily. However, we can shorten it or do a change or swap of belt buckles as well. It's just one of those that definitely take a little more time. Now, one of the most common ones that we see, if I can see which ones are, there we go. There's a number of belts here, are ones that are stitched like these ones here. They just have a stitch right there. This one has little small side stitches there, and then this one has a stitch clear across right there. And sometimes you'll have just maybe 1 or 2 rows of those stitches, sometimes 3 or 4. This one here, for example, the red one, it's got 4 because it's got 3 belt keepers there, and then plus the belt buckle, so there's a total of 4 stitches. So those will just vary depending on how many belt keepers you have on there, you know, the design of it and everything like that. So that's just one of the designs that we see very commonly. Shortening those is a little bit more challenging, just because if you come in and say you want to actually shorten the belt and not just punch a new hole in the belt, and you only need about 2 or 3 inches, well, a lot of the holes that are left up here just end up transitioning to the back. So on the back side of the belt, you might see the holes, but on the front side, at least, usually that's not very visible. So there's some things to take into consideration, that if you get a belt and you only need it shortened a couple of inches, on the back side, you may see some holes left over from the original areas where it was stitched and the punches were the holes were punched for this pin right there. So thought I'd mention that. It's a common thing, however. And then one of the other ones that are a little less common, but we see a frequent amount, is where this piece right here, where the belt buckle and the keepers are connected separately from the actual belt, are stitched to the belt. So that means all we have to do is unstitch all of this, take off the buckle, the keepers all together with this piece of leather right there, and then cut where we need to, do any kind of finish work, and then restitch it where it's supposed to go. We do the same exact thing with this belt here from Christian Louboutin. It's the same exact story. You've got the belt, and then you've got this strip of leather here that holds the buckle, and it's a very different mechanism or different design. I prefer this design because it's easier to adjust, and it can be pulled off to make it look as original as possible very well. And that's just one of those things that even changing out the belt buckle on is not a very hard thing to do majority of the time. Like this one's got a couple of stitches there, so might be a little bit extra work to just change out the belt buckle, but it can be done. So want to point that one out. This belt, I did a video on shortening it. We cut off this chunk right here. So if you want to check that out, definitely do so. It's the Christian Louboutin belt shortening video. If you want to check it out, just look for that logo there and you'll be able to find it and you'll see how it's done. This one's got a screw pin right here, so you undo the screw and then you're able to take it apart. There's no stitching or riveting or anything like that. Now the last type of belt is kind of like this one that I have here. Again, keep in mind this is kind of supposed to be a big bulky one, but snaps. If it's got a snap on it or some kind of little buttons or something like that, which can easily come undone, just like this one here, you can take off the belt buckle and swap it out very easily and effectively. These ones, shortening them is, try to put it back together real quick, but it's not turning out as quickly as I'd hope, so I'll just set this aside like that there for now. But those belt buckles in particular with the snaps, they're a little more limited on being able to shorten. Those ones I highly recommend that they're a minimum of 3 inches to be shortened. If you need only 2 inches, at that point I'd recommend just doing a hole on there. Otherwise, there are a couple of hole punches at the very tip right here. But it becomes a little more problematic if we're just shortening it from the belt buckle side, which is one thing I will mention also. When we shorten belts, we usually shorten it from this side here, the belt buckle, not from the tip here, okay? Shortening it from the belt buckle side will keep it looking more original. If there's any kind of problems, the belt will usually cover a lot of that. And the other thing is you still have all the original holes and everything, and the very tip of the belt just shifting over however many inches we end up shortening it. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, if it's just 2 inches that needs it, then just a hole punch is plenty good there. But talking about the hole punches, punching too many holes is not a good thing either. It's going to look funny. You're going to have a long strap that's just flopping around like that there. You don't want that kind of stuff going on. And also it kind of weakens the material. The more holes that are punched, the weaker it becomes. So wanted to point those out while we were talking about the holes and shortening the belts in general. So there's a lot of different methods and techniques to shortening belts and giving you little less, in other words, on those belts. So if you have questions, definitely a good idea to either send us an email with some photos, or if you're local here in Denver, stop on by. Now that we've finally gotten through the construction types of belts there are, again, there are a number of other belts out there. Sometimes they're metal, they've got chains on them, and too, those are a whole different category. Basically, shortening belts with chains is not a fun thing. I don't like doing them. There are belts for specific industries like construction work belts. There are ones for police officers, medical staff. There are weightlifting belts. Those are basically almost their own category. They're still belts, but they have so much more additional things. The belts we are talking about are belts that you can kind of wear on a day-to-day basis, whether it's with a nice suit, or just to kind of look decorative over top of a nice dress or whatever it may be. This is just generally what type of belts there are. There are a lot of different methods for latching it to. There's a regular belt buckle like this that has a pin. There might be 2 pins, 3 pins like that, and sometimes you have some that are just like this one here, where it's just got that back pin and it goes into the hole there. And so there's a number of those belt buckles too. There are custom ones. It's just endless, and they're coming out with more and more. So we're not gonna be able to cover all that. I won't even be able to cover it because I don't have all the varieties or even half of the varieties currently here at the shop. But we've seen a number of different ones out there, so definitely can't cover all that. One last thing though I will mention before we finally talk about storing belts is the fact that you need to understand if a buckle is broken, say the pin is broken on this buckle right here, if it's just the pin that came off and it's gone or whatever, most of the time we can replace just this pin. However, if it's this portion of the buckle that's broken, once it's broken, there's not much we can do. We can either take off the whole buckle and swap it for a new one. We usually recommend picking one out yourself and bringing it with the belt to say, I want this buckle on this belt, and we can definitely do that. A lot of times we see these kinds of belt buckles right there where this pin snaps off. 99% of the time, once that thing is snapped off, it's done for, unless it's a special type of metal, say like a silver belt buckle. At that point, we'd highly recommend taking the belt buckle itself, if you can, to a jeweler so that they can solder it back together. We are, after all, a cobbler shop. We don't do too much with soldering. There may be a few odd cobblers out there that do some side soldering, in other words. Almost rhymes there, but you know, it's not something that most cobblers are even going to touch, in other words, because we have enough to do with our leather expertise and not have to try to deal with a whole different industry and category altogether just to be able to fix these little tiny pins like that. Best thing we can do is if a pin like this ends up missing or something, we can sometimes replace it, and even then some of those pins are very odd shaped or have like an intricate design or pattern to it that we won't be able to replace it with something even remotely close to original too. But again, like I said, either bring it by or send us a picture, and we'll be happy to help however we can, either give you advice or at the very least be able to examine it and explain to you why we would have the issue of not being able to fix that, and maybe see if there's other alternatives for you as well. So now we can finally talk about storage. Now obviously you can see that this Christian Louboutin belt here is rolled up like this because it came in this nice little baggie and this box and everything. I keep knocking this box over because it's got this pin right there, so it's gonna keep wanting to fall over. But it's a nice concept. It looks beautiful, especially when it's stored away all beautifully and nice. However, not a good idea. Do not roll up your belts like this. Obviously, you buy them brand new when they come in a box like this. You ordered it in shipping and they rolled it up. You know, that's perfectly fine. But you gotta remember the fact that they end up rolling it way too much. Forcing that belt to basically roll like this will stretch that outer portion of the leather, but that inner portion of leather will end up kind of not stretching, in other words. So you end up having a different stretching stretching amount between the different layers of leather, and that's how you end up with things like this here, for example, where it splits. And that's what happens. I mean, it happens while you wear it too, but it takes much longer for that to happen. If you're rolling your belts up like this for storage, it's going to happen much quicker, and in some cases you may only be wearing that belt once or twice a year, which I have had that happen. Somebody came in and said, I've only worn this twice or 3 times, and look what happened. It came in like this. So keep that in mind. Storing your belt is not okay to do like this. If you buy a nice belt and it comes in a box like this, or is shipped in a box like this, all rolled up in a nice baggie, take it out immediately and try to have it stretched out as much as possible. The ideal method to do so is literally having your belt hang like this. Put some hooks in your closet. You could use a hanger as well. Hang them up like that and allow everything to be stretched out at its own weight. Don't hang anything at the bottom, obviously, but just let it hang like that, and it will last much longer. That is the ideal way of storing your belts, no matter what kind of material it is. I mean, obviously, if it's a nylon material or a elastic material like this, that is a different story altogether, because you can store those however you want, because these things can be, look at that. You could tie this thing into a knot and it'll be fine, okay? You're not gonna have any kind of issues with that. But anything that is leather or looks like leather, whether it's exotic leather or a fake exotic leather, real full grain leather, even these single ply belts too, same exact story. You wanna have them stretched out as best you can. Now, obviously, not everyone might have enough room for that, but at the very least, if you have a closet, obviously, most people will have a closet if they own belts and clothing. So My best recommendation, if you can't have it stretched out like that, grab your hanger like this or something equivalent to it and just latch the belt on like that. I can do it like that. There we go. And then just let it hang, okay? That is just enough to be the equivalent of what your waist would be right there, and there is no tension that's forcing the leather to turn or bend extremely in a certain direction. That little bit of the belt twisting will not cause major irreparable damage. I can't even talk, man. But just storing it basically in this kind of manner right there is going to be fine. Obviously, like I said, the ideal method would be to have it stretched out, but if you have limited space, this would be better. Or if you're traveling, for example, as well, this would be better too. So just put it in your suitcase if you can, and just put some clothes around it and things like that. Forcing your belt to be rolled up like this, you're causing more harm and more damage to it, and I just don't recommend doing it. While they're in storage at the companies and the facilities that are selling the belts, that's on them. I have no say over them. They are multi-million-dollar companies, and they do whatever they want. And if I tell them, look, you guys need to stop that, they're not even gonna pay attention, basically. So, there's not much I can say. But I would like to highly advise all of you, shoe enthusiasts, boot enthusiasts, belt enthusiasts, people who own a number of belts and collections of them, please, 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 do not store your belts. I don't care if they're a cheap belt or if an expensive belt. Do not roll them up like this here and keep them in these bags and boxes for extended periods of time. Obviously, this belt was rolled up already when it was brought in like that. This gentleman left it in this little box here, and so we're going to keep it that way until he picks it up. But when he picks it up, we will be sure to tell him, when you get home, please, we highly advise that you hang that belt up. The box, just set it on a shelf because it looks nice, but that's the extent of it. Do not roll it up ever again, especially when your body starts giving off heat and this material will absorb it. It's going to shift and adjust a lot quicker than if it was just sitting there cold, never warmed up from your own body temperature. It's gonna mold a lot quicker, and things are gonna change in that belt very, very fast. So I wanted to mention that. Keep it in mind, please. Don't do that. Just don't, because you're gonna end up with this kind of stuff. And also, for those of you who may be wondering if this can be fixed, no. I'm sorry, no. I don't care what cobbler says, yeah, I can fix it. This will not properly ever get fixed, ever. You can stick as much glue as you want in there, but it's never going to properly get fixed. The adhesive they use at the factories for these things has a chemical reaction that occurs with a number of our adhesives and does not bond properly. The other thing is, like I had mentioned, one layer of this belt is more stretched out than the other. Always. Even if it's just an eighth of an inch difference, that could be a huge difference when trying to glue that belt back together. If you already currently have a belt, however, that is a multi-ply leather like this, and usually you can tell because like the inside of this belt has a different color than the outside. Typically you can't dye it too well if it's just a single ply leather to this kind of extent. We highly recommend that you take it to a local cobbler shop or to us or a leather expert who can actually run a stitch across for you. We do that very often when somebody brings in a brand new belt like this where it's just has no stitching, and they request that it gets stitched all the way around, and that way it prevents it from splitting, or if it does start to split in certain areas, it's so minor that even the person who owns it won't notice it, and it won't just fall apart on you when you're out and about or at an event. So store your belts properly. Keep in mind the different types of belts. If you have a multi-ply belt that's just glued like that, save it for occasions or get it stitched. Otherwise, if you have one that's already nicely stitched, usually that belt should last you quite some time. And if you have a single ply leather belt, that will last you for a very long time, potentially handed down generations even. So again, I hope this has answered a number of questions. This video did turn out longer than I hoped. I was actually initially thinking of doing just a video on storing belts while I was shortening this belt and doing the video on it. Again, if you want to check that out, definitely check it out in our collection of videos. But when I started putting all these other belts here together, I'm like, it's going to be a little difficult to explain the reasoning behind why it's not a good idea to store belts like this. And so I kind of had to explain the scenario and the different types of belts. So hopefully, even though this video turned out longer than expected, it's appreciated. I will try to do all the timestamps down below and everything, and let you know that you can skip forward on whatever you need to. Probably should have mentioned that in the beginning of the video. Maybe I'll just do a separate cutaway real quick and mention that in the beginning of the video, and yeah. So, but otherwise, again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give a thumbs up, because YouTube apparently has an algorithm that the more thumbs ups you guys give, the more people that like the video, and share the video. So if you want to copy the link, it's, I think, the 3 little dots there, or it says share. You can share it on whatever channels, or to friends and family members, to help our channel grow, which it's been interesting watching how it grows. I never anticipated so far the point that we're at. So thank you for everyone that's been watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel, and hit that notification bell icon. It's a little bell in the corner next to the subscribe button. That'll notify you when we have our next video out. We are trying to make sure that we get into more of a daily type of schedule post, but due to technical difficulties, it's still taking a little more time, and we are also still at the moment working on growing the website as well, with more products and services that we're listing on there. So be sure to check out the website as well, CobblersPlus.com. We haven't added belt shortening options yet, because again, there's so many variants out there, but we're trying to figure out something at least that will give generic options available, and hopefully those of you who are watching this video will understand, you know, what types of belts there are and everything, and why there are those kind of price tiers and options. So again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.